I arrived in Rosebud Hollow on a mild autumn morning, the rising sun casting golden rays across well-kept lawns. Rows of pastel houses lined winding streets, each sporting an identical mailbox, each driveway carefully washed clean. An HOA sign at the entrance read, "Rosebud Hollow, where neighbors flourish," boasting a quiet but proud sense of order. After years of city living, I craved the calm of such a suburban oasis, hoping I might find not just a house, but a sense of community. While I unpacked, a tall woman in pressed khaki pants and a pastel sweater approached. Her short blonde hair fell neatly around her shoulders, her gaze sharp behind a forced smile. "Hello," she said. "I'm Karen Oakland, president of the Rosebud Hollow Homeowners Association. I trust you'll follow our guidelines to preserve our neighborhood's high standards." She extended a thick binder labeled HOA Covenants and Bylaws. I thanked her politely, promising to read them. She nodded, scanning my driveway, my porch, as though assessing potential infractions. Then she turned, leaving me with a mild sense of unease. At the time, I brushed it off, thinking her strict manner was just typical HOA diligence. Little did I know her zeal for controlling every aspect of the community would soon clash violently with my mission, setting up a small donation box to help the local pantry feed the hungry. I come from a family that believes strongly in service. My father once ran a small food pantry, delivering groceries to neighbors in need. When he passed, I vowed to honor his spirit. So, I intended to place a modest donation box by my porch or near the local church, hoping neighbors might drop off canned goods for the needy. A few days after meeting Karen, I discovered how fiercely she guarded the neighborhood's image and how she viewed a charity box as an eyesore, something that might tarnish the pristine facade of Rosebud Hollow. At that moment, I was simply another new homeowner, naive to the struggles that lay ahead. In time, I'd come to see Karen's hostility, culminating in the midnight destruction of my donation box, an act she never imagined would be caught on the church's CCTV. Nor did I foresee the community uniting against her cruelty, forcing her to repay for her misdeeds in a final, humiliating reckoning. Settling into Rosebud Hollow, I found the environment deceptively peaceful. Neighbors walked their dogs, children biked along the smooth sidewalks, and the HOA enforced uniform landscaping. Beneath the neatness, though, some residents struggled quietly. A father confided he was between jobs, a widow worried about stretching her pension, a single mom hinted at groceries running short each month. Hearing such stories, I reflected on my father's pantry legacy. In my old city, I'd often volunteered at a small church-run pantry that left donation boxes around neighborhoods, letting people discreetly give or take as needed. Inspired, I decided to place a modest, mailbox-sized box outside my driveway, labeled with a small sign, "Food donations for local church pantry, any help appreciated." The church, located just a block away, agreed to pick up items weekly. It was simple, not intrusive, a short wooden stand with a hinged lid for canned goods or sealed items. People in crisis could also quietly remove items if needed, though the main plan was for neighbors to donate, and I'd deliver the items to the church. Ms. Jenkins, a friendly neighbor, praised the idea. She recalled a similar concept in a different town, calling it a blessing box. She offered me scrap lumber if I needed more sturdy boards. Another neighbor, Mr. Lee, donated nails. The day I set it up, I carefully painted "Donations for the Church Pantry" in neat letters, just beneath a small cross. The design was unobtrusive, matching the house's color. Then I placed it near my porch steps, ensuring it wouldn't block the sidewalk or appear unsightly. For about a week, everything went smoothly. A handful of canned vegetables, boxes of pasta, and jars of peanut butter appeared in the box. I delivered them to the church each Friday, feeling a quiet sense of fulfillment. Ms. Jenkins told me Ms. Alvarez, an elderly widow, had discreetly taken a few items from the box. That was exactly what I'd hoped for, a neighbor in need, receiving a bit of help, no questions asked. Then, as I was watering my flower bed one morning, Karen marched up. She frowned at the donation box, arms crossed. "What is this contraption?" she asked. I explained the concept, that it was for the local church's pantry. Her expression hardened, as though I'd mentioned something vile. She insisted I'd violated the appearance guidelines. She said, "We don't allow random boxes on front lawns. This isn't a rummage neighborhood. We must maintain a tidy look." She demanded I remove it. I tried to reason, explaining I'd placed it discreetly, harming no one, but she scowled, calling it an eyesore. Then she turned on her heel, threatening an HOA citation if I refused to comply. Disturbed, I told Ms. Jenkins, who was appalled. She said the box wasn't harming property values. Plenty of neighbors liked the idea. She recommended I attend the next board meeting, present a formal request. Meanwhile, Ms. Jenkins suspected that Karen's stance was purely aesthetic, ignoring any moral or community benefit. I felt anxious, but resolved to fight for the donation box. The seeds of conflict were sown, soon to erupt into a messy sabotage under cover of darkness. At the HOA board meeting, I explained my pantry box to the 5-member board, including Karen as president, Ms. Jenkins, Mr. Carter, Ms. Mullins, and Mr. Price. I showed pictures of the tidy wooden box, describing how it helped the local church feed families. Ms. Jenkins chimed in with supportive remarks. A few neighbors also spoke up, praising the service. Karen, however, launched a tirade. "This is not a commercial zone. We can't let random structures or boxes pop up, turning our suburb into a charity drop-off site." She insisted it might attract strangers lurking for free goods, degrade the neighborhood's upscale image, and set a precedent for other, unapproved stands. Mr. Price asked if there were any real complaints from neighbors. Karen claimed multiple concerns, though provided no evidence. Ms. Mullins seemed on the fence, worried about property values. Ms. Jenkins argued it was minimal in scale, well-maintained, and in line with the community's spirit of caring. The board debated. Eventually, they voted 3-2 in favor of letting me keep the donation box, provided it remained neat and matched my home's color scheme. Karen and Ms. Mullins voted no, the others yes. Applause rippled from the small audience. I exhaled relief, certain I'd triumphed. But from the hard glint in Karen's eyes, I sensed her fight was far from over. Ms. Jenkins cautioned me to remain vigilant. Karen disliked losing. Sure enough, over the next week, Karen posted on the HOA forum about unwanted donation structures, calling them unsightly and potentially attracting vermin. She demanded residents side with her. She warned about unregulated food items possibly spoiling. Ms. Jenkins, Ms. Carter, and others countered her claims, pointing out the church verified the shelf-stable goods, rotating them frequently. Karen's arguments found minimal traction. Many neighbors privately told me they admired the donation box. Some even left small notes with their donations, thanking me for providing a direct way to help. I believed the matter would settle, not realizing Karen had more extreme actions planned, culminating in an unthinkable act. The local church, St. Gabriel's, had run a pantry program for years, delivering groceries to families in need. The pastor, Father Delgado, was thrilled by my donation box concept, praising how it extended the pantry's reach. A few volunteer drivers picked up the goods each Saturday, restocking the main pantry. A handful of older neighbors, like Ms. Alvarez, discreetly took items occasionally, preventing them from going hungry at month's end. Seeing the direct impact warmed my heart. Father Delgado said the church was willing to stand behind me if the HOA tried to forcibly remove the box. Given the tension with Karen, Ms. Jenkins suggested an official letter from the church, endorsing the donation box as part of its recognized community outreach. Father Delgado penned a gracious note, praising the generosity, explaining how the church oversaw item quality. Ms. Jenkins posted it on the official HOA site. Still, Karen refused to relent, writing snide comments about public charity overshadowing private property rights. Despite that, the box thrived. Some neighbors dropped in a few cans each week. A single mother told me it saved her on days she couldn't afford groceries. Others, newly aware of local hunger, offered to do bigger drives. The only shadow over the success was Karen's hostility. Ms. Jenkins told me how Karen complained daily about the box tainting the aesthetic. Ms. Carter from the board tried to calm her, pointing out the majority had spoken. Karen, ironically known as HOA Karen, among a few locals, refused to let it go. Miss Jenkins confided she worried about sabotage, urging me to keep a watchful eye. Sure enough, one Thursday morning, I found the box's lid forced open, a few cans scattered across the driveway. Ms. Jenkins guessed Karen was behind it, though we lacked proof. Ms. Mullins found it suspicious too. Ms. Jenkins recommended I set up a small camera or see if the church might help watch for wrongdoing. I hesitated, not wanting to escalate. Father Delgado, however, mentioned they had cameras pointed outside the church building across the street, though not sure if it caught my driveway. I decided to proceed as usual, hoping the vandalism was a random act, not a sign of worse to come. But within days, the next violent act would prove me wrong. On a quiet Saturday night, I returned home from a friend's dinner around 11 p.m. The neighborhood lay still, the street lamps casting pools of yellow light on the sidewalks. My donation box stood near the porch, a gentle silhouette in the darkness. I went inside, exhausted, not suspecting anything amiss. A few hours later, however, as the clock neared midnight, a figure crept along the side of my yard. That figure was Karen, as cameras would later confirm. She wore dark clothing, apparently hoping no one recognized her. Determined to rid the street of the eyesore, she approached the box, carrying a small crowbar. Under the faint glow of the street lamp, she pried the box from its stand, violently shaking it until the wood splintered. Cans tumbled out, rolling across the grass. She kicked them aside, her face twisted in anger. The short cross I'd painted on the box snapped off. She tossed the shattered boards into my bushes, scattering the donated goods. Then, scanning the silent street, she scurried away, believing no one saw her. She likely felt triumphant, certain her deed would remain hidden. But, unbeknownst to her, the church across the street had installed new security cameras pointing at the sidewalk, capturing everything. The next morning, as dawn broke, I stepped outside to find my beloved donation box in pieces, cans strewn about. My heart sank in disbelief. Ms. Jenkins rushed over, horrified. We cleaned up the debris, saving some intact cans for the church. Furious neighbors gathered, suspecting vandalism. Ms. Jenkins and I strongly believed Karen was responsible, but we had no direct proof, until Father Delgado mentioned the church cameras might have caught the culprit. Our hope flared. That Sunday afternoon, Ms. Jenkins, Father Delgado, and I reviewed the church's CCTV recordings. Sure enough, around midnight, the camera caught a silhouette approaching my yard. Under the faint glow, we could see the figure forcibly smashing the wooden structure, then scattering items before fleeing. The face was partially obscured, but crucially, as she turned, the street lamp lit her features enough to reveal her identity. It was Karen. She wore a distinctive jacket many recognized from her daily HOA rounds. Shocked, Ms. Jenkins paused the footage, zooming in, confirming it was indeed the HOA president. Father Delgado was appalled at such a malicious act against a charitable cause. Ms. Jenkins said this constituted criminal vandalism and direct defiance of the board's prior approval. She believed the membership would be outraged. For a moment, we debated whether to call the police. Father Delgado recommended we try confronting Karen with the evidence first, giving her a chance to confess or make amends. Ms. Jenkins agreed. If Karen refused to rectify it, we could escalate to law enforcement or an official lawsuit for property destruction. The magnitude of Karen's stupidity stunned me. Did she truly think no one would see her? Perhaps her obsession with controlling the aesthetic overcame all logic. Ms. Jenkins was furious, calling it the final straw. She scheduled an emergency board meeting for Wednesday, telling me to present the footage. Meanwhile, Father Delgado and Ms. Jenkins posted a careful note on the neighborhood site, referencing vandalism to the donation box, hinting they had video. The rumor mill exploded. Many guessed Karen's involvement. The entire community braced for a confrontation where Karen would face the consequences she never imagined. On Wednesday evening, the community center was packed. Word had spread of a shocking sabotage. Ms. Jenkins sat at the center of the board table, flanked by Mr. Carter, Ms. Mullins, Ms. Willard, and a conspicuously absent Karen seat. Karen arrived late, face taut, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. The hush that fell was electric. Ms. Jenkins hammered the gavel, announcing the meeting's sole agenda: vandalism of the donation box and review of evidence. Ms. Jenkins called me forward to recount the event. I described discovering the destroyed box, the spilled cans, the heartbreak of seeing that generosity stomped upon. Gasps rose from the audience. Ms. Jenkins next invited Father Delgado, who explained how the church's cameras captured the vandal. At Ms. Jenkins's signal, Mr. Carter dimmed the lights, projecting the black and white CCTV footage. The entire room watched, transfixed, as a figure forcibly smashed the box, silhouette revealing Karen's unmistakable profile as she turned. Ms. Jenkins paused the frame, highlighting the face in the lamp's glow. A ripple of shock and condemnation swept the crowd. Karen sat stony-faced, though her cheeks reddened. Ms. Jenkins turned to her, voice trembling with anger. "Karen, this footage clearly shows you destroying the donation box. You acted against the board's decision allowing it. This is not just a violation of HOA rules, but possible criminal vandalism." The room erupted in murmurs. Ms. Mullins, previously aligned with Karen, looked horrified. Mr. Carter demanded an explanation, as did Ms. Willard. Karen stammered, "I believed it was an unauthorized structure. I wanted to maintain the neighborhood's look. People shouldn't drop off random cans on our street." She insisted she had no ill intent, claiming she panicked about spoilage or rodents. Ms. Jenkins cut her off, reminding her the board had explicitly approved the box, the church monitored goods, and no rodent issue existed. Some neighbors shouted for Karen's resignation. Ms. Mullins said she felt betrayed that Karen lied about mysterious complaints, only to sabotage it personally. The tension reached a breaking point. Ms. Jenkins declared this an egregious act, not just defying board authority, but destroying property used for charitable ends. She suggested a formal censure or immediate removal from the HOA presidency. Applause broke out. Karen attempted to salvage dignity, but the evidence was undeniable. Ms. Jenkins insisted the board vote on punishing Karen, possibly requiring her to repay for repairs. Ms. Mullins and others demanded an apology to the community and the church. The board members conferred, outraged by Karen's sabotage. Ms. Jenkins proposed an immediate motion: censure and fine Karen for the donation box's destruction, plus mandatory repayment of repair costs. If she refuses, the board may remove her from presidency or pursue legal charges. The audience, a throng of neighbors, voiced approval. Mr. Carter seconded the motion. Ms. Mullins, previously Karen's ally, agreed. Ms. Willard nodded. Karen was cornered, facing potential criminal complaint for vandalism if she refused. Asked for a statement, Karen, pale with stress, mumbled about fearing the box would degrade property values, that neighbors disliked it. The crowd booed, telling her she was lying. Ms. Mullins said she felt personally misled, having believed Karen's talk of community negativity, only to see it was her personal vendetta. Ms. Jenkins hammered the gavel, calling for the board's official vote on the proposed punishment. The result: 4-0 in favor. Karen abstained, imposing censure, a fine, and an order to repay the cost of a new box. If Karen continued resisting, the board threatened legal action or immediate removal from office. The tension snapped when Ms. Jenkins demanded Karen publicly apologize to me, Ms. Jenkins, the church, and the entire community for destroying the box. Karen stood, trembling with humiliation. She stuttered out, "I'm sorry," though her voice was cold. Ms. Jenkins pressed for a real apology for interfering with a charitable cause. Karen managed to say, "I apologize for damaging the box. It was wrong." The crowd remained unmoved. Ms. Jenkins declared the matter partly resolved, but said if Karen didn't pay for repairs promptly, they'd proceed with a membership recall. Father Delgado quietly accepted the apology on behalf of the church, though none were truly satisfied. The membership departed, abuzz with condemnation of Karen's actions. Miss Jenkins told me we'd replace the broken box with a sturdier one, with funds from Karen's forced repayment. Freed from sabotage, I felt relief, though sadness that a neighbor's pettiness caused such damage. Little did Karen realize that her final humiliation still loomed. Neighbors planned an even bigger show of defiance, restocking the box in a public demonstration of unity. Word of Karen's vandalism spread like wildfire through Rosebud Hollow. The mention that she'd been caught on the church's CCTV outraged many. A wave of sympathy for the Pantry mission rose, overshadowing any concerns about aesthetics. Miss Jenkins proposed a box rebuilding day, inviting volunteers to gather on my lawn to construct a sturdier donation container. The local hardware store donated some materials after hearing the story. Miss Jenkins scheduled it for the following Saturday, expecting a modest turnout. That morning, over 24 neighbors arrived, armed with hammers, paintbrushes, and a desire to show that Karen's sabotage hadn't destroyed their generosity. Even Ms. Mullins, once supportive of Karen, showed up, apologizing for having doubted the box's worth. We spent hours building a larger, more robust box with reinforced hinges and plexiglass windows to see donated items. Miss Morris's children painted cheerful designs, a small cross, and the words, "Neighbors helping neighbors." The sense of camaraderie was palpable. People chatted about how they never wanted the negativity of one official overshadowing the giving spirit that truly represented the neighborhood. As we mounted the new box on a sturdy wooden post, Miss Jenkins read a small statement thanking the church, acknowledging Ms. West's invitation for the church to bless the new structure. Father Delgado arrived to say a brief prayer, praising the community's strength. Miss Jenkins ended with a direct vow, "No further act of vandalism will stand. This box belongs to all of us." Applause erupted. The moment felt like a symbolic victory over Karen's narrow vision. Then, in a final show of defiance, neighbors produced bags of canned goods, cereals, and personal care items, filling the newly placed box to the brim. Cameras flashed, capturing smiles. Ms. Mullins, tears in her eyes, said, "We needed this. This little box shows we care, no matter how pristine the lawns appear." Ms. Jenkins nodded. Indeed, the donation box now represented the heart of Rosebud Hollow more than any fancy landscaping or uniform fence could. Meanwhile, Karen watched from afar. She rarely emerged publicly since the board's censure. Rumors swirled that she fumed about the gaudy new box, but with the entire community behind it, she dared not physically destroy it again. Miss Jenkins and Miss Carter told me that if Karen made one more move, they would proceed with an immediate recall. Miss Jenkins also said if Karen refused to pay for the original box's damages, the board might sue. Karen, forced to pay the fine under board supervision, parted with a sum that covered the new box's materials. That left her bitter, seeing the structure she hated standing even bigger and stronger. She posted a lukewarm apology on the HOA forum. "I regret acting rashly regarding the donation box, but I still question whether it suits our aesthetic." The membership's reaction was scathing. Some told her in replies that she was out of line, that the box was a beacon of compassion. Miss Jenkins and I, during a private conversation, reflected on how Karen's obsession with a perfect facade ironically led to the entire neighborhood uniting around a more genuine form of perfection, helping the needy. Miss Jenkins said she found it almost poetic that Karen's destructive act backfired so thoroughly. She added that Karen might not survive the next board election cycle, given her tarnished reputation. On the ground, the new donation box thrived. The church reported an uptick in donations. People who never donated before were dropping off a couple of cans each week, spurred by a sense of pride and defiance. Seniors, single parents, or anyone with a tough month quietly took a few items. Father Delgado said the local food pantry felt the difference. Miss Jenkins concluded that, ironically, Karen's sabotage had only increased awareness, making the box more popular than ever. 3 months later, the HOA membership meeting arrived, typically where the board updated the community and took general feedback. This time, anticipation soared. The fiasco with the donation box overshadowed other topics. Karen, still in the role of president, but with limited moral authority, called the session to order. Miss Jenkins, Miss Carter, Mr. Price, and Miss Mullins sat to her side. The meeting began with routine agenda items, budget, landscaping, pool maintenance. Then Miss Jenkins introduced new business, formal recognition of the donation box as an official charitable amenity, plus final statement on censure. Miss Jenkins delivered a short speech praising how the box had strengthened neighborly bonds, reading a heartfelt letter from a local family who survived a financial crisis thanks to the free groceries. Applause and sniffles abounded. At that point, Ms. Carter opened the floor for any members wanting to address the topic. Ms. York, Ms. Morris, Mr. Alvarez, and others rose, praising the box's positive impact. Then Ms. Mullins proposed a resolution to list the donation box as a permanent, board-approved fixture, ensuring the HOA can't remove or vandalize it again. She also recommended that Karen's censure remain on record as a warning. Karen sat motionless. Ms. Mullins motioned for a vote among the membership, as the board had the authority to designate official neighborhood structures. People lined up to cast ballots. Ms. Jenkins tallied. The final count was overwhelmingly in favor, with only a few votes opposed. Ms. Jenkins declared the donation box a recognized, protected part of the community. Thunderous applause. Karen's face reddened, powerless. Ms. Jenkins concluded with a statement reaffirming that any sabotage or removal attempts would bring severe board sanctions. At this point, Ms. York, a longtime resident, stepped to the mic, scolding Karen publicly for her cruelty. She recounted how Ms. Alvarez once needed food from the box. Ms. York demanded Karen explain why she destroyed something so vital. Karen stuttered some excuse about visual uniformity, but the crowd scoffed. Another neighbor demanded she resign. Ms. Jenkins hammered the gavel, stating that if any official motion to recall Karen emerged, they'd proceed. A murmur spread, but no formal recall was introduced that evening. The membership parted, leaving Karen humiliated in the wake of an unstoppable tide of communal empathy. Though Karen kept her presidency for the moment, the censure hung over her, along with the forced payment for the new box. Ms. Jenkins ensured the finances were handled transparently. Karen's check covered the wood, paint, screws, and even some additional enhancements we'd made. Ms. Carter explained that the board designated the rest of any leftover funds for a small protective roof over the box, shielding donations from rain. Ironically, Karen's money improved the very structure she despised. Socially, Karen faced an icy reception at gatherings. A portion of the membership refused to greet her politely, some crossing the street to avoid her. Ms. Mullins, once an ally, distanced herself, calling Karen's sabotage unforgivable. Even minor committees Karen had led, like the landscaping oversight group, seemed less receptive to her input. Ms. Jenkins quietly told me that the membership might still push a recall if Karen didn't step down on her own. For now, she seemed too proud to resign, but her power was effectively neutered. Meanwhile, the donation box thrived. Ms. Jenkins and I built a small sign reading, "This structure stands for neighbors helping neighbors. Vandalism will not be tolerated." People took pictures, praising how the fiasco ended in victory for the less fortunate. Father Delgado posted about it on the church website, citing it as an example of good arising from misguided harm. Karen's final punishment was thus threefold: a formal censure, a substantial fine covering the box's reconstruction, and the loss of moral standing among neighbors. She realized her attempt at controlling the neighborhood's image backfired, leaving her publicly shamed. Ms. Jenkins said it was likely Karen would not run for re-election, given her battered reputation. The next board election was months away. Some quietly hoped she'd move away to start fresh. With the donation box established as a permanent fixture, a new sense of unity blossomed in Rosebud Hollow. The once superficial tidiness overshadowed by Karen's obsession gave way to genuine neighborliness. People talked more openly about hardships, each family more willing to lend a hand or a can of soup. Ms. Jenkins planned small community charity drives, collecting clothes or school supplies, further fueling the philanthropic spirit. The negativity swirling from Karen's sabotage ironically galvanized the neighborhood's better angels. Each week, I watched the church volunteers arrive, calmly emptying the donation box, leaving it tidy for new contributions. Ms. Morris told me the box's presence reminded her daily that help was near if ever finances got tight. Ms. Yerk noticed that a shy teen, rumored to have left home, once took a small bag of groceries from the box. This small wooden structure, once dismissed as an eyesore, was now widely recognized as a symbolic heart of the community. Karen, overshadowed, rarely made appearances at new philanthropic events. She insisted on continuing her typical HOA tasks, like sending out yard maintenance notices. But the membership paid her no adoration, seeing her as an outdated figure who tried to crush compassion under a veneer of uniform lawns. Ms. Jenkins extended an olive branch by inviting Karen to sign a supportive statement for the donation box, but Karen declined, apparently too proud or bitter to publicly reverse her stance. Ms. Mullins said Karen was definitely planning not to run for re-election, feeling the unstoppable wave of disapproval. For me, each day the donation box stood unmolested felt like a testament to how a single destructive act could unify neighbors in defiance. Freed from Karen's sabotage, the box served as a quiet beacon for families in crisis. The entire fiasco proved that no matter how controlling an HOA Karen might be, a community's shared kindness can overwhelm petty tyranny. Finally, the next HOA election cycle arrived. Ms. Jenkins, Ms. Carter, and others formed a slate championing transparency, empathy, and constructive solutions. Karen, facing near-certain defeat, chose not to run, bowing out quietly. On Election Day, Ms. Jenkins easily won the presidency, with Ms. Carter as vice president. The membership gave them a strong mandate to continue a more open-minded leadership style, especially regarding charitable projects. In the aftermath, Karen's once ironclad hold on Rosebud Hollow dissolved fully. Stripped of her formal title, she lingered as just another homeowner, overshadowed by the memory of her sabotage. Ms. Mullins told me Karen rarely left her home, apparently humiliated. Ms. Jenkins considered the matter resolved, content that a gentler, kinder approach now reigned. The box stood as a daily reminder that giving overcame destruction, that the community valued real generosity over a pristine facade. Thus, Karen was effectively punished, forced to pay for the repairs of the donation box she destroyed, publicly censured, losing her position, losing her neighbors' respect. Her illusions of controlling every detail shattered when she realized the entire neighborhood, plus a local church's CCTV, wouldn't condone cruelty disguised as maintaining aesthetics. Freed from her oppressive oversight, Rosebud Hollow discovered a deeper sense of neighborly care, forging unity in the shadow of sabotage. Ending with Karen is punished. Karen Smythe, the HOA Karen who dared to rip down a church-supported pantry box, met her final humiliation when the board confronted her with CCTV evidence and forced her to repay every cent for the new, sturdier box. She faced censure, lost her moral standing, and eventually relinquished her leadership role under overwhelming community scorn. Meanwhile, the donation box thrived, the church's camera guaranteeing no further sabotage. In the end, Karen's petty act led to her downfall, proving that, in Rosebud Hollow, compassion prevails over pettiness, and no single authoritarian stance can silence the collective will for kindness and empathy.